Together.
It's been quiet.
Status quo.
Yeah,
we were just chatting about that actually. I was with Pat, right? Like I think I was here just before Dalton McGuinty prorogued, right? Like the prorogation hadn't even happened yet. I don't remember a discussion about the prorogation at all.
Yeah.
So since the time we got together, the House prorogued. We had a 4-month sort of hiatus.
Yeah.
And now Premier Wynne, whole Liberal leadership, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So a few things have happened in the meantime. Thank you, by the way, for taking the time and with Mohammed's work and doing the piece on me as well. I was grateful to have that exposure in the Citizen. Anytime you use a picture of my wife and daughter, by the way, that's looking 2/3 of the family. That always helps too.
Good. All right. Well, this is your suggestion that we meet. So, perhaps why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us what's on your mind these days, and we'll have lots of questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the chance to come by too. I mean, I want to talk a bit about what's changed since the last time we got together, and particularly the dynamic in the province today, as a bit of a soap opera will unfold in the next few weeks. I ask myself, and I think Ontarians do as well, really two questions. Number one, is Ontario on the right track? And I think the vast majority of Ontarians would agree with me. The answer to the question is no, that we need something new and different to get us moving forward again and restoring hope to those that have lost hope in our province. And secondly, if you agree that Ontario is on the wrong track, do you believe that the current government who made the deliberate decisions that got us into this mess has a capacity to actually put us back on the right path? And the conclusion I've reached on that question as well is no. I've let you in on this too. I'll give some more detail if you like. I've had a series of meetings with Premier Wynne, as we discussed last time I was here. We brought forward our own bold ideas to help get the books back in balance, create jobs in our province, get Ontario back on top again. I had a chance to meet with Premier Wynne now on 3 occasions and 1 phone call to get those points across as well. But she's chosen a path which I view as basically entrenching the McGuinty agenda and continuing the overspending. So the conclusion I've reached based on those two questions and our efforts that have not been successful with Premier Wynne is that if we want to get Ontario back on track and growing again, we need to change the team that leads this province. And quite frankly, the hole has become so deep on the deficit, the loss of jobs, and impacts on our ability to attract jobs. The sooner we get about to bring about change in our province, the better it'll be for all of us.
Yeah. So you'd say it's time for an election? I remember last time you weren't quite willing to go that far.
Yeah,
to bring the government down.
Yeah. Well, we got to get change. Right? Get a new and different path, and quite frankly, the throne speech was a moment of truth. It could have been a turning point with Premier Wynne succeeding Premier McGuinty to try something that was new and different. But I mean, I'd ask you back this, maybe you've seen anything other than a bit of change in the language they use that is a departure from the course that they had the province on. And we've done our best to put ideas on the table. We've done our best to talk to Premier Wynne directly. And I find
the Freudian stuff, eh?
Well, I kept calling him minister for the first little while too, right? He just used people in certain positions. And as we have between my finance critic and the finance minister, I'm just not seeing a glimmer of recognition from the current government of the depths of our jobs and debt crisis, nor any new solutions. So I think the only way we get back Ontario back on a path of recovery, creating jobs, getting our books back in balance, is to change the government.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone expects you to support the budget, but there might be a chance the New Democrats will. Do you have a feeling for whether they're as eager to have a vote as you?
Well, I think the answer is no. I'm sure you'll have a chance to ask Andrew Horvath that directly. They're engaging in a bit of the old political game of horse trading, right? That they have a series of sort of disconnected one-offs around, I think it's insurance rates, rules around proroguing the House, home care, and corporate tax increases. And it looks like they're seeing how many of the boxes on their grocery list to get put in the cart, and to make their decision from there. So I mean, she'd probably give you the same answer, and she said it publicly. Her decision on the budget will come about as to how many of those boxes get checked off. The concern I have is that we don't need a change in. I mean, if you're driving a car, it's about to go off a cliff. And I think that analogy is not a stretch, because I actually do believe we're in the biggest jobs and debt crisis of our lifetimes. The answer is not just to take your foot off the accelerator and slow down a bit, or move the wheel 10 degrees to the right or 10 degrees to the left. You actually have to hit the brakes, go the opposite direction. We need a 180-degree turn, not a 10-degree turn. So the NDP will make their decision, I guess. I just, my view is it's not in the interests of people in this province, particularly the 600,000 unemployed, for the NDP to prop up this government any longer. Okay. But they'll make their own decision.
How would you do? Pardon me?
I said they'll make their own decision. I don't think they'll listen to what Hudak has to say.
Right. How would you describe kind of the tone of your discussions with Kathleen?
Really good, actually. Yeah? It's always dangerous to use this analogy. I'm going to do it anyway. Here's the reality sometimes in politics, no surprise to folks here in the room. Sometimes it's got a bit of that element of pro wrestling, where you can put on a big show for the camera. No, you're not. I'll see at least Kate smile on this one. It's not too dangerous territory. Right, you put on a big show for the camera and a lot of drama and question period. But you can go and have a coffee or beer afterwards. And largely in my 18 years in politics, that's been my experience. Not all politicians, sometimes in all three parties you'll have blinders on, and just because the other parties have different colors of lawn signs, you can't talk to them. But for the vast majority of politicians, you can have that. And I will say this, I mean, I've had a very good relationship with Kathleen Wynne. We were both kind of climbing the ladder a little bit together, I guess, when I was in opposition and she was a newly elected member in 2003. We did a lot of the same circuit, the talk shows. Where I would actually see her out in public when I was in Toronto and in her riding. When I'm in Toronto, I'm actually in her, she only lived a few blocks away from where her home was. So we got to actually have a good personal relationship. I've had three actually quite cordial, relaxed meetings with her. But back to my analogy, I mean, we just don't see eye to eye on the depth of the problems in the province or how to solve them. But we have good conversations on a number of issues, and I think it's actually helpful to, whether it's the big issues or even small things in terms of what bills are going to be debated, to have that open door relationship and a ability to have that type of conversation between leaders without running to the press and giving all the details about it. I didn't have that relationship with Premier McGuinty, unfortunately, in the minority government, but I've had three good discussions in her office and a phone conversation. I think we'll agree to disagree on some of the big picture issues, but it's been a good open forum. Yeah, I think she's sincere. She believes what she says. It's just what she believes and what I believe is a way out of this mess are entirely different things.
Yeah. Okay. Kate, do you have a question?
Is that surprising at all? Let me ask you that.
No, I wouldn't have said so. Well, everyone is described her as kind of a negotiator and someone who's quite conciliatory. So no, I don't think that does surprise me. But I didn't expect that you'd find the discussion very productive.
In some ways, there are some things that we could, where you can be productive, but in terms of the big picture stuff, like I said, around House procedural issues and that sort of thing. Right. I'll give her my advice, and she, will take it or leave it on some issues, like the Toronto casino thing that sort of boiled up. I warned that this was a risk, and I think she does think it through, and I appreciate that chance to vocalize it. So that's been a very helpful development, I think, good development, but ultimately in terms of the direction of the province, I don't see much of a change.
Yeah. You mentioned the casino, so I'm sure we're going to get to it at some point.
Is that an issue here?
Yeah. What do you think of it all?
This is, let me go into big picture and I'll talk about what I think that means for Ottawa. I think we have some fundamental problems in our province. We have a government that spends too much money and is borrowing too much money to pay for it, which puts the things that we care about at risk. When we spend $10 billion a year on debt interest, that's more than we pay for all of our highways, bridges, and transit systems in the province. And it crowds out investments in hospitals, classrooms. We have a government that has decided to increase taxes and put hydro rates through the roof. And I think we have a real customer service issue in our province too, that we're losing track. The government is there to serve the people who pay the bills. Right now it seems like it's the other way around. I don't believe in my gut that opening 29 new casinos in the province of Ontario is going to be a solution to those fundamental problems. It has consumed our largest municipalities, Ottawa, Toronto, Hamilton, in a debate at council as to where casinos should go, as opposed to addressing these structural issues. And at a time that you have 600,000 people who have no job to go to today, and they'll go through the weekend, and come Monday we'll have no job to go to. I don't believe in mowing down the racetrack slots operations to build casinos in undetermined locations is going to help the problem. In fact, I think it exacerbates it.
Yeah. So you don't think I don't think anyone would say, well, this will solve all our fiscal challenges, but OLG's kind of shift in focus away from kind of the border casinos that aren't making any money to more urban casinos when they where are potentially more customers. You don't agree with that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on with this issue for like an hour,
sure,
so
yeah.
I'll try to be brief, and then I'll respond to questions on this. I mean, I come from Niagara, so I mean, being against casinos be like being against waterfalls and wax museums, right? No offense to the good quality jobs that come about as a result of both in my home area. And I've been intimately involved in this file for a number of years. I come from Fort Erie. It has had a thoroughbred racetrack for 115 years. A racetrack that survived 2 world wars and the Great Depression that is unlikely to survive the current approach of this government, and was one who advocated for the industry, and then had the ability to work with the sector as minister both with the Lottery and Gaming Corporation and then the Alcohol and Gaming Control Commission, with 2 different ministerial hats on. So my interest in activity in this file is long. So here's how I would address the issue quite differently. I don't believe, you heard me say, and we reflect on our agenda for growth, that a core role of government is to be in the gambling business. I think a core role of government is to make sure that you have an honest game, and we should be a tough and respected regulator. But I don't think that at the time we don't have enough patients who have a family doctor to go to, that government's role is to ensure that those who are dealing blackjack or serving drinks at a casino should be on the government payroll. So I would fade government's role out of the gambling business and focus my energies on being the respected regulator. That also help bring in a lot of American customers. The inevitable happen. You know this is going to happen, that eventually Michigan and New York are going to build their own sites, and that happening now, or as a result, our resort-style casinos are barely floating above breaking even. In fact, some have lost money over the years. What has worked have been the racetrack slots initiatives in the interim. So it seems to me sensible, if you are going to expand, you look at where there is demand in the marketplace, and then you would build on what you have. So by way of example, if you did want to add on more choices, whether it's a sports book, if that gets through the Senate, or table games, then why wouldn't you put them at an existing racetrack slots operation where demand is there? You build on what works instead of closing them down on the hope that a new commercial casino is going to be better.
So what would you do if you came into office and we've got the state of these plans for city casinos, we've got plans to shut down? What would you reverse? Would you reverse what's happened here in Ottawa? Would you?
Well, I mean, we haven't. I'm not going to give up hope that some of the common sense that Lisa MacLeod has been espousing here won't eventually penetrate the current government. I believe in her gut that Premier Wynne knows they're on the wrong course on this, and you folks recently wrote a story, if I recall, saying that your local Liberal MPPs have been interestingly silent on this issue. So I'm not going to give up hope that they won't reconsider and look to building on what already works. Here's another difference in terms of how I approach this versus the current government. I think that their current plan is actually more about empire building and is more centered around taxation. It actually says in the OLG plan that only if a lot more people would gamble a little bit more, we could help address our fiscal issues. The approach that I've always taken in my interactions with this file as an MPP, as a backbencher, minister, and now leader of the opposition, has been there should be an economic development aspect. It shouldn't simply be about grabbing more money, more tax revenue, and that's why my default is always to build around what's currently working and expanding options at those sites, as opposed to closing them down. I don't know where we're going to be when the election will take place. I don't know how much damage has been done. That's always the challenge when you have to clean up somebody else's mess.
So you wouldn't if there were shovels in the ground, you wouldn't necessarily go.
No, we're obviously going to be pragmatic. We're going to be thoughtful. But my goal right now is to help to open the Liberals' eyes to the fact that I think a much more sensible approach would be the one that I won't repeat it, that I just laid out on the table. And I'm not convinced that the current approach, the empire building, tax revenue grabbing approach, is going to last long. I think hopefully that this recent embarrassment, and congratulations to Mayor Watson for calling them out on it, I think that helped to change policy across the province. You can't pick winners and losers among municipalities. It should be fair and equal for all who are participating. This may give Premier Wynne a chance to back away from a file that I think is not in the interest of the province.
Now, sorry, I just want to jump in on that point, because do you understand what formula Toronto was basing its expectations on getting up to $100 million in revenue from the waterfront casino?
I'll give you my insight. I'm pretty sure this is not just only my gut instinct on it, and I think it's also probably the reality. As I talked to Paul Godfrey or Rod Phillips about these details, no, I've not heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But here's what I think happened. I think under Premier McGuinty and Finance Minister Duncan, they embarked on a path of an aggressive expansion of the Lottery and Gaming Corporation. And part of that that's happened is, I said, empire building, which is going to be shiny new resort casinos. And let me add to this too. I think there's something that sounds very dated about these policies. There's no doubt a lot of governments, including the Ontario government, the NDP and the PCs, embraced casinos as a tool in the 1990s. Since then, pretty well every other state and province have gone the same direction. So I do worry that we're selling a bit of a pipe dream if we're talking about a massive Vegas-style resort casino in Toronto. I know we're not talking about that here in Ottawa. That somehow is going to be a game changer. When I see a major casino of that nature in New Jersey just declared bankruptcy to the embarrassment of Governor Christie, I worry that the empire-building approach might result in something similar. I think when you're doing interior casinos and you have casinos on the border like we do here in Quebec or in my riding with New York State, you're looking at existing customers as opposed to bringing in tourists from the world to a casino in Toronto or Ottawa. So I'm sorry, you asked me about what, I wandered a little bit there.
What do you think of the funding formula?
Yeah. So the funding formula is based on slot revenue and a declining scale. And in fact, Lynette can follow up. Monty McNaughton is our critic on this, and he asked a question in the House which actually detailed the existing sliding scale. So up to a certain number of revenue from the slot machines, the municipality gets a share of that revenue. It's a sliding scale, which resulted in Windsor and Niagara Falls approximately $3 million. The other complication here is, I don't recall if you've covered it or not, the Windsor Casino has a Me Too clause. As the first one in, they had a Me Too clause, so they would be entitled to benefits if the formula were enriched for Toronto. It would have, unless they break that deal, benefits for Windsor as well. So under that existing formula, I think Toronto's revenue would be around $20 million. It would be larger than Ottawa or Niagara Falls in all likelihood. But even under the grand scheme that they propose, like a massive Vegas-style resort, I think it's about $20 million. What Monty will point out, and I'll get you the numbers to make sure I'm accurate, is if it were to be up to $100 million, as the OLGC had floated with city councillors in Toronto, you'll be looking at revenue about the size of the entire Las Vegas Strip. So clearly, long story short, they were way off the formula. I think they were making a one-off deal to try to force a casino into Toronto as part of an empire building process. So a long way getting about to your answer. That's what I think happened. They were caught out on it, and again, credit to Mayor Watson on this. You know, they've had to backtrack, and maybe they're reinventing the formula, but one exists, and if you apply that formula to even an ambitious Toronto casino, you're around a $20 million hosting fee as opposed to the $100 million. Oh. If you applied that formula and came up with $100 million at the end of the day, you're looking at a casino the size of the entire Las Vegas Strip, which is not even.
So if Windsor has a Me Too formula, does that not suggest that there's different formulas for every
formula's the same
for different cities?
No, the formula's the same, and we were consistent in doing that. There've been no other new casinos in the province since the PC government. But Windsor, which was under the NDP, negotiated a clause that said if there were any changes in deals with other casinos down the road, because they knew with the first one, they would benefit from that. Okay. But they have the same formula applied to them as Niagara Falls or Resident. I mean, listen, I just want to reinforce this position too from the get-go. I just do not believe that a realistic solution to our economic and fiscal problems is a whole bunch of new casinos. I also think that there has been an extraordinary amount of effort from forced upon municipalities and by the province in going down this path. So I think that the first thing you do is decide what the government's role is. I laid that out. You build on what exists. I think reasonably you could look at market demand sometime down the road, but let's get first things first and get that structure in place, then the government can back away.
And so at that point, then you could say, okay, if the private sector sees
market opportunities, yeah, but where I'm coming from, so the answer is yes. I think that's what you eventually build in this province, but you're not going to see Hudak and PCs running around the province saying casino here, casino here, casino there, because I do not believe that that's going to be a solution to our problems. I think the approach government's taking is misguided. It's about tax revenue. And our solutions for economic problems that we've talked about last time, glad to talk about today, are much more fundamental. They're province-wide as opposed to a series of one-offs. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for sure. I mean, being an opportunity to get back to sort of first principles and ideal situations, right? So we're sort of thinking, okay, well, what should it look like in this province?
Yeah. And I'm not convinced that there is a huge amount of market demand for new casinos, given the reality in 2013 is a heck of a lot different than the reality of the mid to late 1990s, where we were sort of the sole player in the game. Since that time, not only Quebec, New York, Michigan have moved in a big way.
I think one of the questions maybe Kate was getting this about subsidizing an industry. I mean, I'm from Fort Erie too, which makes us very unusual having two people from the same. Yes.
What street did you grow up on?
Niagara Boulevard, down the street from.
Whereabouts?
Just down there by Frenchman Street. Well, my parents know you.
Get out of here!
Yes.
My parents put in a good word for you.
Yes, no, my parents are teachers, and they know your parents. Yeah.
At Fort Erie High School.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Anyway, but the racetrack.
Research on the personality.
Yeah, not many tables have two people from Fort Erie around them.
Well, my parents live in the Parkway too.
I know, that's amazing. Yes, but the racetrack and slots. I mean, they're subsidizing that. That it has been there for 100 years, but that industry is dying of its own. The reason it's staying alive is because of the slots, right? So, is the government in the business of picking those industries?
Well, I mean, we are already in this business, and the mainstay of the Lottery and Gaming Corporation is, of course, the lottery itself. That's the biggest one. But then the second biggest is the racetrack slot operations. That's actually what's kept that corporation going and has brought revenue to the province for things like hospitals and in schools. No, I don't think anybody said that any program that you begin, you always should have some sort of sunset review of those programs, because when we began the Slots at Racetrack initiative in 1997 or whatever it was, it has moved a long way from what we imagined it to be in 2013. And as you probably know, there's been a couple of reviews recently, including the Sadinsky report that suggested some structural changes. And I think pretty well everybody in the industry agrees that the program wasn't working. So what we suggest in our agenda for growth, and sorry, make sure I'm clear about this, is actually in our new deal for the public sector white paper, and then the agriculture one that we put out last week gives a bit more detail on this, is when so you should bid out the slot operations around the racetracks. And as part of that bidding out process, make sure they structured partnership with the horse racing sector so racing days continue. We have not advocated for return of the SARP program, nor is the industry calling for the same old SARP program. So you would make sure that the horse racing sector's future that would be tied to whoever's going to operate the racetrack slots, and have them do that partnership as opposed to a subsidy coming from the provincial treasury.
Okay, I'll let Matthew ask some questions, but coming from a border town too, I would argue that those kind of false subsidizations of industries like that on the borders have been one of the reasons towns like that don't do well, because, but anyway, that's probably another.
Okay,
yeah.
But so the choice you have, now the government has actually moved into a direct subsidy with a lack of transparency, where you have to negotiate and come hat in hand to government. That is never a recipe for success. What we suggest is when you bid out the slot operations, make sure the successful bidder, including the existing racetrack operator, has as part of that their commitment to maintain the races.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Right, go ahead.
Yeah.
This is not related to casinos.
That's probably
you mentioned several times about the 600,000.
Until I warned you.
You mentioned several times the 600,000 out of work Ontarians. Of course, one of the things that, and we know that yesterday the federal government looks like it's going to maybe try to get involved a bit back in training if the provinces sign on. But we know that one of the things that the Liberal government came up with was a second career strategy to help unemployed manufacturing workers retrain for work. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how successful it's been.
I don't know, and I'm looking for your call. And I'm not being facetious or cute here. I am, because what I liked about certainly is there a need for it? Yes, and I think government does play a role in helping people who are out of work and displaced get back to work, hopefully as quickly as possible, saying it's going to be a career for them. And it is particularly heartbreaking, and I'm sure Matthew, you've probably talked to people in a particular bracket, But we have lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs, and a lot of those individuals would have been in their 40s and 50s. So there's still some distance away from pension and retirement, but in a very difficult demographic to get hired in a new job. Because often people will look at somebody who's in that age category and they may pass them by because they'll believe that they are too old, or expectations salary may be too high, and look to a younger person. And that's awfully heartbreaking for somebody who may be head of the family, whether the principal breadwinner or making a good paycheck in any family arrangement, to go from what they had assumed was a job for life with a good pension to basically looking around for part-time work just to put money on the table. So I think government does play a role, an important role, in helping those individuals get back in the workplace before their skills or their hope deteriorates. Was the program successful? That's something we have to look at, because there are critics of the program and there are those who say it's a success. So I think it was well intentioned. I'll have to look at data to see if it was successful or not. What I did like was the portability of the program, though, in allowing people to help make choices as to what their career path was going to be and choose the institution they think is going to best deliver that. That's certainly better than a centralized government-operated institution where everybody comes through the door, the government tells you, okay, you're trained for this, you're trained for that, and narrow people into boxes. So I like the choice aspect of that. Was it perfect? Did it have, no, did it have warts? Yes. But I do like some of the aspects of the program. How's that sound? Now, I think you were saying in your column, where you said the work you're going to do, there's some who are excluded from that program. And I think sort of the hint you gave me was some with literacy challenges, for example. A tool that I think we need to use more often in Ontario too are social impact bonds. One of our papers called a Fresh Start for Youth talked about this particularly. And this is where private investors invest in the success of a social program just as you would in a job program. You're nodding, so you're probably well aware of this tool, which is not new to United Kingdom, United States, but it's new to Canada. I think for those that have the most intense needs, I like the idea of social impact bonds, where investors then use people who have skills in this area, whether not-for-profits, charities, or private for-profit companies, and can focus on those with the highest needs, and then they're paid for the results that they deliver. And if they don't deliver those results, they don't get paid for them. And you can actually structure the deal to have rewards based on exceeding the standards that were set. So by way of example, in New York City, they have a program like this helping the homeless to actually get stability, get life under their feet, and then move into the workplace. In the United Kingdom, they've structured this around high recidivism rates in their prisons, where investors have worked through, I forget the name of the delivery agents and not-for-profit, but they found that some 70% people actually were back in the judicial system within a year or so. Slipping my mind the exact numbers. So they've used the Cameron government social impact bonds, where they do intense work on those with the highest needs, highest demands, and highest risk, and they're paid for their performance. Still in its early phase, I think to a second or third year now, but the early results are promising.
And you talked about, so what responsibility, because you talked about that demographic of folks who thought they had a job for life and they don't, and we often hear in Ontario this shift toward this knowledge economy where everyone needs a credential or some type of specialized knowledge. What would a Hudak government do to help those folks who thought they had a job for life and found out when they're 45, 2 kids, one trying to get to university, that they don't have a job for life?
First of all, part of the premise that I think that the current government has in its approach, and I think that the third party NDP also believe in, and I think in many respects you will see increasingly that it's harder to distinguish between those two parties and the policies that they'll bring forward for the province. It has been one that the manufacturing is dead, that this is a sunset industry, and that we need to move beyond that. I actually reject that premise. I reject it absolutely. I think that actually manufacturing has a bright future in Ontario. My Ontario will always build things, will always make things, will always fix things. It's a competitive advantage. It helped our province and helped to strengthen our middle class. I think there's, I won't go into much detail unless you want me to pursue it, a lot we can do in terms of helping that to happen. But the Americans, for example, McKinsey just did a study and I think talked about 5 million manufacturing jobs that are going to be actually coming to the States, because the notion that that manufacturing jobs are all going to go to low-income economies is actually being debunked now, and moving back to North America. So we can open our doors to this, or we're going to let them go into Michigan and Wisconsin, Indiana. We'll talk more about that. So what I think we need to do, I think we need to do a lot more on the skilled trades. So knowledge-based economy, sure, but part of the knowledge-based economy doesn't necessarily mean software. That's an important part of it, but it also actually means skill-based. And almost every manufacturer I go to, my usual simple question is, give me 3 things that you need to see the government of Ontario to do. I hope to be the next premier to have that opportunity. There's 3 things that you want me to do. One of the top 3, and almost invariably in the top 2, more skilled tradespeople in our workforce, whether that's precision machine operators, whether that's electricians, whether it's in the technology side. There is actually a strong demand today for these types of positions. I think there's an easier transition to make in terms of upgrading skills and putting them there. But honest to God, almost everywhere I'm in Ottawa, the GTA, Northern Ontario, there actually is a demand for skilled trades, and we should have our colleges deliver that as well. So I would shape more in that direction.
But is that going to help someone who's 45 get a job when they finish that training at 48? Like, what specifically are you going to do to help those folks?
Well, give the colleges a greater role in act, because I do believe our colleges, including Algonquin here, have an excellent reputation for matching skilled labor to the workplace. I think they do a much better job than government does in finding out where the demand is going to be and building those partnerships. So I would take more of the responsibility out of the Ministry of Tourism and colleges and universities, where we have a number of bureaucrats who are built to actually run these programs, match people up with jobs. I mentioned the social impact bonds for those that have, because in the past you could probably get a good job, strong middle class, and a pension, even without some basic literacy skills. You lose that job, you don't have a hope in hell of getting back in. So I think the social impact bonds will help those with the highest need get into the workplace. You create more demand for jobs through our economic plan as well. And the last thing I'll say, I mean, I've not read in detail what Jim Flaherty's budget had to say on the training programs. So I've watched the top line coverage. But I do like this idea, again, of shifting away from an institutional model for training to actually having companies sponsor the training positions. So, for example, I was at Cyclone Manufacturing that does aerospace. Now, this is not Ottawa, it was in the Brampton area. They want more people. They're trying to work with their colleges to get people to fill positions because they're winning contracts around the world out of Peel. So if they want to have a position, help them sponsor a training position, they put skin in the game. I think the federal program is $5,000 matched by the federal government and the provincial government. I like that idea too, because you're actually showing people at the end of the day that there is a job to go to. So you work through the employers.
So you can see your government, you're matching that contribution?
I like the plan. I like the notion of the plan. Now, obviously, I think that wherever you can, decision-making closest to the ground is best. That's why in our education paper, for example, we talk about those that spend the most time with students. The teachers and the principals should have much more decision-making. Similarly, when it comes to training, I think the province can actually do a good job. Now, my argument is probably undermined by the fact that I don't think the current government is doing it anywhere near an adequate job, and that's probably why the federal government is moving to assert more control in this area. But ultimately, I like the direction and how they deliver these programs. I like to see the province actually deliver those programs, but I understand why they're shifting away from it. We have not been successful in the current governance regime.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
Just, you had talked about how we're not producing enough of these skilled workers. You hear that from manufacturing. It also seems like in Ontario we're overproducing a lot of workers who don't get jobs. And one example that I would draw is like teachers, for instance. Our schools are graduating a lot more teachers than there are positions. Is it time to shut down a teachers' college in the province?
let the schools decide that, the universities and themselves do that, as opposed to Hudak giving some grand decree. But what you laid out, Matthew, I think illustrates a problem that we have. And I appreciate the editorial that you guys did when we released our post-secondary education paper a month or so ago. But what I think we need to do more so is when we flow money to the universities, make sure it's connected to jobs at the end of the day. So you give the students information from the get-go on your likelihood not only of getting a job, but getting your job in that field. And you help adjust the funding mechanism that way. So if we're training too many teachers, for example, the signal is sent pretty fast. You're trying to replicate as best possible market signals here, but there's just not going to be job openings at the end of the day. And will that way also encourage more of the universities to specialize in areas where they're going to land jobs and help us compete in a highly competitive international marketplace. So on the technology side, more engineers, more MBA. But it's not my Hudak or my universities and colleges minister deciding what programs are going to be successful. You do it through the funding mechanism by giving students more information on their likelihood of getting a job. What we missed today too is jobs actually in their field of study. The last element, which doesn't address the teaching issue particularly, but I think will help give the right incentives for a greater jobs focus through our post-secondary side, is actually let's start measuring and rewarding not only the number of people who land jobs in the field, the next step is who is going to create jobs. So some universities have done an outstanding job. I know that Carleton here is in this field as well, of the incubators linking the students with entrepreneurs, angel investors. So why doesn't our funding formula similarly reward universities that have students that go out and actually start companies and create jobs?
There are stats out there, though, that show that people graduating in the humanities have lower unemployment rates than people in trades, actually. I mean, what are the dangers of having too much direct attention towards turning universities into job-making, employee-making factories versus liberal arts or a strong education? And those people, despite, what we tend to think, those are the people who are have better luck with jobs or making more money in their jobs. So.
And I would argue, I guess, in the approach that we want to take, that the students would then get that information. So if you are getting a good job at a certain salary through a humanities degree at University of Ottawa, an aspiring student at Notre Dame High School, where I went to, she would see that information and make her career choice. Now, granted, you go 4 years to university, the market can change, but at least at the outset, and then the further steps you make on your program, you know the likely outcome. So I think that would be reflected.
The information that you're, But is there, you said there's some incentive. How do you incentivize that then? That's money for the university, or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the way that the block funding, and Rob Leone could probably give a bit more detailed, who's our critic for the area and the sponsor of the white paper, on how the funding formula actually works. It just seems to me that you shift that funding formula to the universities to reward those who are placing students in the jobs.
Doesn't Ontario have a lesson learned in medical schools with doing that? I mean, is that not one of the factors in having so few doctors graduating for a while, that they were cut back because we didn't need them and there's such a lag?
I think that was an arbitrary decision by the government around government health planning, as opposed to a marketplace. A market discipline decision. So you're right. I think that you're
pretty directly related in this province, though, right? I mean, you can't be a doctor if you.
I don't think they gave potential medical school students information on their likelihood of becoming a doctor. That's why I answered Matthew's question with respect to teachers, because there are a heck of a lot of students out there who have a burning desire to help kids excel, and then are heartbroken when they find that they've got to run around the province getting temporary job to temporary job. We also have some other impediments on the teaching side, where veteran teachers are getting the opportunities. The most recent cave by the government to the teachers' unions around principals losing the right to hire who they want to for these types of positions based instead of a seniority-based system, this exacerbates that problem. With respect to medical schools, it wasn't an issue of them not telling doctors their likelihood of getting a job, and therefore they cut them off. Every one of those doctors would have probably had 20 communities, clamoring to get them to set up shop. It was a decision by the government then in the early 1990s under Bob Ray that said, we're going to change your whole healthcare system and limit the role of doctors because doctors are driving up costs in the system. Okay. It was a very naive decision that is taking
So you're saying if you had the information you want to have, then that wouldn't have been done?
For sure. I think that anybody who goes to medical school today is going to have all kinds of offers.
Mohammed, you haven't had a chance
to get back to...
Yeah, Mohammed's strangely quiet here. Just now you're making me nervous. You're out of character. Because it's Friday and I found you worn out.
We asked Premier Wynne a number of questions. We asked her to tell us, since she's been in office, what has surprised her the most.
Oh yeah, when did that happen?
And one of the things she mentioned last week, is your attitude, your politics.
Right.
She says, like you said, you get on very well, you talk, you have conversations, and she thought actually coming in, that you were one person she could work with, that you could sit and find a way to help the province. And she's been very disappointed in your attitude. Bewildering, actually, she called it. And so could you respond to what she's saying, that your politics, she doesn't understand your politics. She doesn't understand how leader of the opposition will say, I won't support a budget, even though he hasn't seen it, he hasn't even read it, and he says, I won't support it. She said that kind of politics really surprises her. Can you respond?
I think what that is just a reflection of the fact that we have very different views on the state of Ontario's fiscal and jobs challenges, and secondly, how to remedy them. How you describe Mohammed is a reflection. The first two questions I said at the beginning of this discussion, Premier Wynne obviously would answer yes to both of those questions. She believes Ontario is on the right track, and she believes she and her team can actually keep Ontario on that track. My answers on both those were the opposite, as you recall. So her view would be Ontario's on the right track, and sure, we can make some compromise with the opposition to tinker, to make small steps in either direction. I think it's a reflection of the very different view we have of the province and its challenges. My point of view is that we need actually fundamental change and to take a new and different course in Ontario. Just another analogy, and it's probably a bit tortured, but it's sort of the way I look at it in my head. I mean, if you think that the foundation of a house that you're living in is crumbling, you don't simply agree to change the wallpaper or a new coat of paint and stay in that house. You got to fix the foundation and rebuild. She's in that first view. She thinks the house is working fine. I have a totally different view, that we actually have to build a new foundation and take a different path in our province.
Yeah, but politics is about compromise. I mean, if you have to give something, she has to give something, and then you both work for the province. But you've closed the door. You've said, no, I want an election, no budget. And the impression is you're placing your political career ahead of what is in the interest of the province. Are you not?
Well, I think in fact it's quite the opposite. In fact, so just back to the essential question: are we on the right track or the wrong track? And this is not like Ontario is sort of cruising along. We're doing okay. I think that things that we care about are actually like our hospitals. The ability to add new cancer-fighting drugs to formulary, helping disabled individuals in Ontario move into the workplace, or kids with special needs learn the joy of reading a book. These things are all at risk if we don't actually get our fiscal house in order. And that's the irony of those who oppose our plan. Compassion is about having both the will to help out the most vulnerable, but also the ability to do so. And if you don't have both of those things, you can't help advance important social goals in the province. And every time we spend, we waste money. Every time we drive the debt deeper, every $1 billion that we borrow limits our ability to help individuals like I just illustrated. So her argument may be valid if you think Ontario is kind of on the right course, maybe needs a slight adjustment. I think we need a fundamental shift, or the things we care about are going to be at risk. The house of cards comes tumbling down, as I said to you before, when interest rates go up even a single point. Secondly, let's get so that explains why her view is, if you just have one or two things on the grocery list, we can all move ahead and we can celebrate that, and we can all put something on our mantle and walk away happy. I just have a very different view that we need to take an entirely different course in the province. It's fundamental change in a new and different direction, not tinkering at the margins. We'll continue talking about our plan. That will make our job more difficult. Listen, I mean, winning an election campaign is going to be challenging. There's no doubt. I have formidable opponents who I respect. It's always a challenge to get your message out during a campaign, and we'll have considerable third-party spend from the public sector unions, particularly, who want to keep this government in office to contend with. That'll be hard enough. The harder part of the job is actually governing and getting Ontario back on track and making necessary decisions to get out of this mess and get Ontario as leader again in Canada. And there'll be benefits for all at the end of the day. The election will be hard. The harder part of the deal is actually going to be governing. And see, what does it mean for the PC party? the longer it takes to reverse course, the deeper the hole gets, or whatever bunch of analogies I want to mix together in some big pile here, the more difficult the job is going to be to govern. And the more I worry that we're going to lose more young talent to other provinces, we'll lose more companies to the States. So what do? We continue with our plan. We can do talking about it. It just makes me worry that our ability to get Ontario back on the right track will be that much more difficult.
So what happens if there is an election this spring and it returns a similar legislature to what we have now? But it would be, I know it's a bit of a hypothetical, but how would you handle that, right? Like, if voters decide, well, we don't mind having a Liberal minority government, how would your party react to that or work with it?
I mean, well, what was at the time? We respect the will of voters, and I do believe that voters will weigh very carefully the two questions that they put on the table at the beginning of this meeting. I am confident that the vast majority of Ontarians want to see a new and different path for our province. The vast majority of Ontarians think that we can do a lot better than this, but we'll respect whatever decision that they make. But one thing I did not hear from the last time that we sat together through prorogation or in the first 2 months under Premier Wynne is a siren call for more of the same. The status quo. In fact, I hear just the opposite. I think it's growing.
You've talked. Go ahead, Kate.
I just was wondering about how the white papers that you've been putting out over the last little while will inform the platform in the next election. What's the process?
Well, a couple of things. I think, as you know by definition, that white papers are at the core directional. They show the direction we want to go. By putting them out early, it helps people. First of all, I want to make sure that people know the direction we want to go, but also make sure that we have things right and they can be tweaked. So a platform, I mean, any government that puts out a platform with 10,000 different ideas will tell you ultimately that they'll probably get 0 ideas done. So a platform will be much more focused. I think you can see these things then as guidance for cabinet ministers, the general direction we want to go. But you'll see a platform very much focused on the big issues, which is jobs and the economy and balancing the books in the province. And the one thing that I want to reinforce that I think is a very different view than the other two parties. You can't do one without the other. If you have a strong growing economy, that's going to help make the balance of the books less difficult. But if you want to have a strong growing economy, you have to send a signal you have a plan to balance the books. The sooner the better, if you want to reinforce business confidence in the province. The two are actually interconnected. You can't cut your way to prosperity in a growth plan too, but we do have to reduce spending.
You've talked about meeting with Kathleen Wynne several times, and I'm actually curious if you've had an occasion to ever sit down with Andrea Horvath, and whether or not you think, and maybe I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball a bit, but would you say, based on your meetings with her, that she shares the same desire for you to change path, even though it might be a different path than where you see your party going? Do you think they are also eager to take this to voters, or do you think that is your read on it that she will get enough in the budget that will satisfy them?
So you're trying to look down and look pensive, you take a pen. I know you have long answers to these things. So the answer to your question is yes, and the second part of your question is no. Let me tell you why. So the first part, yeah, actually, Andrea and I are practically neighbors in Niagara, Hamilton. I have part of Hamilton in my riding, a bit of a similar background, family-wise and stuff like that. And you've had Andrea here, like a very warm and engaging personality too. So we have met from time to time. There's a huge gulf between the PCs and the NDP. Don't take a picture of that one. Between the NDP and the Conservatives on policy issues, but we share a lot of common ground on making the the committee's work, transparency, holding the government to account, and get along on a personal level. So yeah, I do meet with Andrea. With respect to, do I think they want to jettison the government? My answer is no. Now, I've not asked Andrea that question. Do you want to get rid of the government? And I know around the same time that I met with you guys, she met with you, I think, around the same time. So you might have the same chance to ask her. But as I said a bit earlier on, I think that there is very little to distinguish on a policy front the Liberals and the NDP these days. I think that Andrea probably believes, you can ask her directly, that fundamentally, to my initial questions, I think fundamentally they believe the direction the government is going is probably the right direction. They just need some tweaks here or there. That's reflected in whatever you want to phrase them as, the demands or whatever she has for the upcoming budget. That is not a structural comprehensive reform plan. That's a series of ad hoc one-offs. So that tells me that her viewpoint is likely, if you ask her that question, that she thinks that the government's on the right track, just needs a slight change of course. I think we need a 180-degree turn.
Yeah. Could political opportunism play a role in her thinking? She has polled well at times over the last few months.
I ask her that, right? I mean, I kind of learned the lesson the hard way, not to put too much faith in the top line polling numbers. And if there's one thing that's absolutely consistent about polling, it changes.
Yeah.
So that's a better question to ask her, I think, directly.
Fair enough. We've just got a couple minutes left. You referred at the outset to kind of a soap opera over the next couple of weeks. How do you see it playing out?
Well, we kind of talked about that in a broad perspective. I think that we need a fundamental shift in direction on the big issues, jobs, economy, and the deficit. I think the NDP's viewpoint is that they may countenance propping up a government that's deeply tainted by scandal if they get a few prizes to put on the mantle that don't really address the underlying problems. So I suspect you'll see a budget brought in, and you'll see some horse trading between the NDP and Liberals, and ultimately the NDP will decide if they're going to prop up the government. And anytime the E word comes up, that will consume sort of the Queen's Park Gallery on the back and forth negotiations rumor of the day. So that's what I mean by the soap opera.
Right.
I think that the sooner we get about to fixing the underlying problems, the better. But I've been through the drama before, so I think you'll see a lot of focus on the actual vote. It's the best way I can describe it. And the time frame probably, we've not been told an official date, but it's probably around the third week of April that would start. Votes tend to be about a week or two after that, depending on how much debate they allow on the budget bill.
Yeah, we'll watch with interest. That's pretty much all the time we have time for. Was there anything that we didn't get to that you really want to?
Well, the one thing that we'd sent out a release today, and what I've been talking about the last week or so in terms of focusing on part of our plan, I think is important. It's been ignored by the other two parties, and that's the ticking time bomb of our public sector pensions in Ontario. It's $100 billion difference between the promises we've made to existing retired workers and those who are going to retire, and the funds we have to finance that. That is enormous. And $100 billion, we have a choice. We can take that $100 billion out of our hospitals. We can take that $100 billion out of our highways, or the pocketbooks of Ontarians, 75% of whom in the private sector don't have a defined benefit pension, let alone the gold standard of government pensions. So this is we brought forward a number of recommendations, and I did directly with Premier Wynne. I think unfortunately she's rejected those. It often is under the surface because it's complex. These are big numbers, but the sooner we get about addressing this issue, the better it's going to be for all of us. And it's dramatically unfair even to government work. There's two levels of unfairness here I want to stress. One is it's unfair to government workers to make promises the government knows they can't currently fund. And I don't want to see us end up like some of the European countries or some of the American municipalities where they've had to actually reduce pensions for people who are already retired.
These are pensions the people working now are paying into, though, right? I mean,
Exactly.
So are you talking about if changes come, they would happen as of, I mean, not retroactively? Legally, I don't think you can.
That's right. There's a complexity here, so I'll address that in the second point. So the first, I think it is unfair to the government workers to make promises that the government knows it cannot keep. And the second thing is it's actually unfair to Ontarians who don't have this gold standard of government pensions to ask them to continually pay higher taxes to bail out those that do. This is a dramatic and increasing unfairness in our system between public sector haves and private sector have-nots when it comes to retirement income. And when I see that the private sector unions, transportation through Air Canada, steel, mining, the CAW, where all of those unions have moved now to a hybrid pension where they respect existing pensioners and those that are best in the system and have a less generous pension for new employees. If that's happened on the private sector side, I think it's only fair and reasonable to say that the government needs to make a similar shift. to the question that you asked about, obviously the preferable route is to do these through negotiations. I recognize that that won't be easy. You may have to do legislation, but you do it in a very fair and balanced way, similar to what we're seeing in the private sector. So I've said for new employees, and granted there won't be a lot of new employees for a while, you need to similarly have the kind of savings plan that exists in the private sector as opposed to the government one.
Doesn't that make that number you're quoting somewhat misleading, because that is a promise made and will have to be paid out regardless of, right?
Just to finish on the sort of the two remedies that I put on the table. So just like we've seen with the other private sector unions, I think similar, we need to move on the government side. I think that's an issue. It's fundamental to fairness as Canadians, but we do it in a transitional way as opposed to betraying any promises that have been made, because that's not fair. And the second aspect is to move up the retirement age. The defined benefit government pensions were created in an era where we didn't live as long. One of the great accomplishments we've had as Canadians is people live longer, but there has been no defined benefit pension ever invented that can pay you out longer in retirement than you did contributing to the system. So when we have, for example, teachers who can retire at 55, that means it's a great thing, like my parents are, to your earlier question.
Yeah, no, I think you answered it. I mean, it's similar to what's being done elsewhere.
You'll have to pay for them in some way. Agreed. But what I want to close the door to is going back to the vast majority of Ontarians who have nowhere near that level of pension, to have them pay more in taxes to bail out those that do. That kind of unfairness, I think, runs against our values as Canadians and is not sustainable.
All right. You're in time, eh?
Can I throw one more on the table, just if I get a straight with this? One last all the numbers. We have 11,000 people on the government payroll making more than $140,000 a year. So under the gold-plated pension plan, you get 70% of earnings indexed to inflation. So that means you will have 11,000 workers down the road making $100,000 or more undefined benefit pension. Another illustration of why this is not 1,000. Yeah.
All right.
No, terrific. Thank you very much for the time. Good catching up.
Anytime.